The cold wind cut through the silent night as Tomas walked through the dark streets, avoiding looking back at all costs. Every step he took him a little further away from the small house he had called home for so many years. His mind was clouded, a tangle of confusing thoughts that mixed guilt and relief in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. He felt trapped between two worlds, between the responsibility he abandoned and the freedom he sought, but which still seemed distant. With every breath of the wind, it was as if the past was trying to grab him, but he hardened his heart, knowing that, once far away, the echoes of his son Pedro's faint cry and Isabella's pleading look would become just shadows. In your memory. As he walked, Tomas reflected on what had led him to that decision. Months of financial hardship and constant fighting had turned his home into a place he could barely stand. Isabella, who was once his inseparable companion, now seemed more like a memory than a living presence. Pedro's birth, instead of bringing the happiness he expected, only intensified the weight of responsibilities. Tomas felt suffocated, trapped in a life he didn't want, and the idea of escaping seemed like the only solution. Meanwhile, Isabella woke up to the disturbing silence that enveloped the house, a silence that seemed to scream in the darkness of the room. Beside her, Pedro, nestled in her lap, slept peacefully, oblivious to the emotional storm raging inside her. He reached for the side of the bed where Tomas used to lie, but found only emptiness and cold. At first, she thought he had gone out to look for something, a momentary escape from the responsibilities that weighed more each day. However, as the hours passed and the pale glow of dawn began to penetrate through the cracks in the window, a feeling of icy despair settled in his chest. Tomas had left, never to return. That discovery hit her like a blow. For a few minutes, Isabella was paralyzed, trying to process what had happened. The initial panic gave way to fierce determination. I knew that, even with the little I had, I needed to act quickly. She could not afford to mourn or despair. Her mind immediately focused on Pedro, who was still sleeping in her arms. She needed to ensure their survival, and time would not wait for her to process the pain of betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Isabella fought the tide of adversity. She went door to door, offering her services as a seamstress, a skill she had learned from her mother as a child, but never imagined would one day be her lifeline. With each refusal, the pain of being rejected increased, but so did her determination. I knew I couldn't fail, not now. Little Pedro depended on her, and that was all that mattered. Eventually, a kind neighbor accepted her offer and asked her to repair some old dresses. It was a humble beginning, but for Isabella, it was like seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. The small house, which was once a constant reminder of Tomas's abandonment, began to transform into a space of hope and work. The sound of sewing machines filled the room, and Pedro's laughter, as he began to take his first steps, made the air lighter and life more bearable. Over time, Isabella's reputation as a skilled seamstress began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Women started looking for her not just to repair clothes, but to create exclusive pieces. It was a sign that, despite everything, things could get better. And they improved. It was during one of these visits that Isabella met Dona Carmen, a lady of noble bearing and a discerning eye. Carmen, upon observing Isabella's talent, saw in her something more than a simple seamstress. He saw potential, creativity, and a rare determination. At the end of a conversation that would change Isabella's life forever, Dona Carmen offered her a unique opportunity to become the main designer of her luxury boutique in the city center. Isabella accepted the proposal without hesitation, knowing that this was the chance to transform her life and Pedro's. From that moment on, Isabella's world began to change. With Carmen's support, she dedicated herself to creating exclusive collections, and in a short time, her work became the darling of the city's elite. Isabella's name, which was previously unknown, became associated with luxury and innovation. The small house, which previously bore the signs of abandonment, now pulsed with life, work, and prosperity. As Isabella rose to success, Tomas' memory became increasingly distant, almost like an erased shadow that no longer had power over her. She dedicated herself completely to her work and raising Pedro, who was growing up in a safe and prosperous environment. With each new achievement, Isabella felt a mixture of pride and relief, knowing that she had achieved everything alone, without depending on anyone. Years passed, and the empire that Isabella built became imposing. Its stores were spread across several cities, and its brand was synonymous with luxury and exclusivity. Pedro, now a teenager about to enter adulthood, studied at one of the best schools in the country and was preparing to one day take charge of the business alongside his mother. However, on a quiet afternoon, while Isabella was reviewing the details of an ambitious new project, unexpected news reached her. Tomas was back. The return of Thomas. Tomas' name was a memory buried in the distant past, almost a forgotten shadow that was no longer part of Isabella's reality. When she received the news of his return, she couldn't stop a wave of conflicting emotions from rising to the surface. Anger, pain, contempt, but most of all, indifference. He was nothing more than a figure from the past, someone who had chosen a different path, abandoning everything they had built together. Now, he dared to return, years later, as if time could erase the betrayal. Isabella, always firm in her decisions, did not show the slightest emotion upon hearing the news. His expression was controlled, cold. He let the informant leave before allowing himself a moment to reflect. She knew that Tomas probably expected to find her the same woman he had left behind, fragile and dependent. But he was about to discover that everything had changed. Tomas, on the other hand, was far from the confident man he once was. His life after leaving Isabella and Pedro had not followed the path he had imagined. The opportunities he had sought quickly evaporated, and he found himself deep in debt and trouble. Without friends and without support, he wandered through several cities, always trying, unsuccessfully, to get back on his feet. Eventually, when all the doors closed, he was left with only one idea: to return to the only person who once meant safety, in the hope of finding some trace of compassion in her. When Tomas approached the old house, he could hardly believe what he saw. Where once there was a modest home, now stood an imposing mansion, surrounded by well-kept gardens and high walls. Confused and intimidated, he stopped in front of the ornate iron gate, hesitating for a moment before pressing the intercom. A female voice, calm and distant, answered from the other side, and he introduced himself with a thin voice, feeling the shame weigh on his shoulders. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, the gate slowly opened, and Tomas entered, feeling small compared to the grandeur of the place. He was led to a luxurious living room, decorated with the most modern and elegant. As he sat down on a soft sofa, his eyes roamed the room, every detail reaffirming how much Isabella had prospered in his absence. When Isabella entered the room, she radiated power and confidence. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that highlighted his slim, elegant figure. Her hair, once always tied back in a practical way, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now sparkled with determination and experience. When he saw her, Tomas could barely recognize her. She had grown into a successful woman, far from the young woman he had abandoned years ago. Isabella stopped in front of Tomas, evaluating him from top to bottom. He was clearly weathered, with the marks of hard life imprinted on his face and posture. For a brief moment, she felt a pang of pity, but quickly shook it away. The man before her was responsible for her choices, just as she was responsible for getting back on her feet. Tomas tried to start speaking, but Isabella raised her hand, silencing him. "What do you expect to find here, Tomas?" His voice was firm, without traces of emotion. "You left without looking back. Did you think that after all these years you would still be greeted as if nothing had happened?" He swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. I had no idea what I was doing at the time. I made a lot of mistakes, and now I need help, Isabella. I have nowhere to go." The indifference in his eyes was palpable. "Help? The same help you denied me and your son when we needed it most." She paused, as if waiting for a response, but he just lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "You had your chances, Tomas, and you wasted them. I built all of this alone, with my own hands, without needing anyone. And now you want, what? A second chance." Tomas felt small, like a beggar begging for crumbs. "I don't want a second chance. I just want a place to start over. Even if it's a job, anything." Isabella watched him in silence for a long time. The man who had once been her husband, who had abandoned her in her greatest need, now stood before her, asking for her help. The irony was not lost on him, but he also knew that Tomas' humiliation would not bring him any lasting satisfaction. She made a decision there, quick and cold. "If it's a job you want, you can have one. There are openings at the factory, as a worker. You'll start from scratch, like I did. And don't expect any favors. That's the only offer I'm willing to make." Tomas nodded slowly, accepting the offer as the only lifeline. He realized that any pride he still possessed needed to be set aside. Seeing him so defeated, Isabella felt a bitter satisfaction, but quickly replaced it with a more practical resolution. She was in control, and Tomas was nothing more than an irrelevant figure in her life now. When he left the mansion to start his new life at the factory, Isabella stood still, watching him walk away. Pedro, who had heard part of the conversation, appeared next to his mother, curious and cautious. "That's my father, isn't it?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt and conflicting emotions. Isabella looked at her son, seeing in him the strength and determination that had helped her overcome all obstacles. "Yes, Pedro. This is the man who left us, but who now has no power over us." She stroked her son's hair, noticing how much he had grown and matured. "You don't have to worry about him. We're fine without him, and we always will be." Pedro nodded, understanding what his mother was saying to him. He knew that as long as he was by her side, nothing could shake them. Together, they had built a future that Tomas would never be able to destroy. The reunion with the past. The weeks that followed Tomas' return were marked by a silent tension that seemed to hover over the mansion. Isabella, despite her determination to move forward, could not completely ignore his presence in her life, even if distant. He worked in the factory, out of sight of her, but the mere idea that he was around bothered her. Not because she still had any feelings for him, but because his presence was a constant reminder of everything she had overcome. Tomas, in turn, sank deeper and deeper into his new reality. Work at the factory was hard and thankless, very different from the kind of life he imagined when he returned. The contempt of the other workers did not go unnoticed by him. After all, everyone knew that he was the ex-husband of the powerful Isabella, the woman everyone respected and admired. He was a pariah among those who, in a way, also contributed to the empire she had built. Every night, after long hours of work, Tomas returned to the small room he rented on the outskirts of the city. The contrast between his current life and the opulence of Isabella's mansion was unbearable. He constantly asked himself how things could have been different if he had made other choices. However, the questions remained unanswered, lost amid the weight of their own decisions. While Tomas struggled with his new reality, Isabella focused on expanding her business even further. She was in the middle of a crucial negotiation that could take her brand to a new international level. It was a project that demanded all of her attention, and she couldn't afford any distractions. However, in the back of her mind, she knew that Tomas could be a threat, not because of his influence, which was now practically nil, but because of the unpredictability he represented. Pedro observed everything with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The return of his biological father was a strange event for him. He had grown up hearing stories of how his father had abandoned them, but he never imagined that he would one day find him. And now that he had found him, Pedro couldn't see him as anything other than a stranger. Tomas' presence did not awaken in him the desire for reconciliation. On the contrary, it made him appreciate even more his mother's strength and what she had achieved without anyone's help. On one of these lonely nights, Tomas made a desperate decision. He learned, through conversations at the factory, that Isabella was about to close $1 million deal that involved the opening of a new production line. He saw this as a last chance to try to regain some control, some position that would allow him to once again play a role in Isabella's life, or, at least, get revenge in some way. If he managed to sabotage the deal, she would be forced to seek him out, perhaps even ask for his help. Tomas' idea was risky and, deep down, he knew he was playing with fire. However, he had already lost so much that the thought of losing more did not intimidate him. One night, he entered the factory with a clear purpose. He knew where the important documents were stored, and in a short time, he managed to get his hands on the papers crucial to Isabella's agreement. He destroyed them, thinking that without them the deal would fall apart and she would be forced to face him once and for all. The next morning, when Isabella arrived at the factory, she noticed something was wrong. Important documents were missing, and panic began to spread among managers. Everyone's first reaction was to try to find out what had happened, but Isabella instinctively knew who was behind the chaos. Her mind immediately went to Tomas, and a cold anger began to boil within her. She confronted him at the factory, in front of all the workers. The figure of Tomas, once powerful in his memory, now seemed pathetic and insignificant. He tried to justify his actions, claiming that he had done it to get her attention, to show that he could still be useful, but the words sounded empty. Isabella didn't allow him to explain much. With deadly calm, she revealed to everyone that Tomas had sabotaged the business, putting the livelihoods of hundreds of families and the company's future at risk. The public humiliation was devastating for Tomas. He saw the contempt in the eyes of the other workers, in the faces of those who had previously treated him with distrust. And, above all, he saw Isabella's indifference. She wasn't furious, she just didn't care about him anymore. He was nothing to her, a past mistake that had unfortunately returned to cause more problems. Without saying another word, Isabella ordered him fired immediately and banned from entering the factory or any of her company's property. Tomas left the factory with shame etched in his soul. With no job, no money, no future, he found himself wandering aimlessly through the city streets. All his plans had failed, and he was more alone than ever. He realized, too late, that his attempts to manipulate Isabella had only driven him further into the depths. Isabella, in turn, quickly reversed the situation. With her skill and contacts, she was able to reconstruct the documents and close the deal, perhaps even on better terms than before. The episode with Tomas was nothing more than a small obstacle in her path, one last proof that he no longer had any power over her. Pedro, observing his mother's strength up close, felt even more proud of her. The incident with his biological father only reinforced his conviction that Isabella was the only person he truly needed. With the lesson learned, Pedro dedicated himself even more to his studies, determined to honor the legacy she was building. Rise and reflection. While Pedro flourished at the company, Isabella began to consider a new chapter in her life. After years dedicated entirely to work and raising her son, she allowed herself to think about something that hadn't been part of her routine for a long time: the possibility of a fuller personal life. She had closed herself off from love after Tomas' betrayal, but now, with her success consolidated and Pedro becoming a man, Isabella wondered if she could find space in her heart for something more. This idea accompanied her during a business trip to Paris, where she went to receive an award for her contribution to the world of fashion. The ceremony was a lavish event, with important industry figures present to honor her. During the event, Isabella met Antoine, a renowned French businessman, owner of a chain of luxury hotels. Antoine was charming, intelligent, and most of all, he treated Isabella with a genuine respect that she didn't often encounter. The two instantly connected. Antoine, like Isabella, had built his empire from scratch, and they shared stories of challenges and achievements that only those who had gone through such experiences could understand. Over the next few days, while Isabella remained in Paris to attend to other business, Antoine invited her to dinners, walks through the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, and evenings at private concerts. Little by little, Isabella realized that she was allowing herself to feel something that she had suppressed for a long time, the desire to share her life with someone who truly understood her. Back in Brazil, Isabella reflected on what she had experienced in Paris. Antoine wasn't just a temporary distraction. He represented the possibility of a new beginning, a life where she didn't just have to be a successful businesswoman, but also a woman who deserved to be happy in all spheres. However, Isabella was cautious. She knew that her priority would always be Pedro and the company, and she wasn't willing to risk any of that for a relationship that might not work. However, Antoine did not give up easily. He began to visit Brazil more frequently, always for a business reason, but it was clear that his true interest was in Isabella. Little by little, she opened up to the possibility of a relationship, but under her conditions. Antoine respected her independence and admired her strength, and this made Isabella feel safe in exploring this new phase of her life. Pedro, on the other hand, observed everything with the maturity of someone who understood the importance of his mother's happiness. When Isabella finally told him about Antoine, perhaps expecting a protective or jealous reaction, Pedro surprised her with his support. He wanted his mother to be happy and knew that after everything she had been through, she deserved to find someone who would treat her like the queen she was. Over time, the relationship between Isabella and Antoine blossomed. He became a constant presence in their lives, but always respecting the space that Isabella needed. She, in turn, allowed herself to relax more, trust more, knowing that both Pedro and the company were in good hands. The years passed and Isabella's brand became a true global empire, now also with Pedro at the helm of his own successful clothing line. Isabella's legacy was assured, not only in the business world, but in the personal life she built for herself and those she loved. As for Tomas, he was, little by little, forgotten. His final departure was a relief to Isabella, and his death, although melancholy, did not cause great ripples in the lives of those he had left behind. His name became a footnote in a story that ultimately wasn't about him, but about the strength and resilience of a woman who turned pain into power. Heritage and legacy. Isabella, with Antoine by her side and Pedro building a bright future, knew that her life had been complete. She had achieved everything she had dreamed of and more, not just for herself, but for those she loved. In the end, Isabella's story was not just a story of overcoming, but a celebration of the power of a woman determined to not just survive, but to thrive and live fully, against all odds. Isabella's life has entered a phase of stability and fulfillment that she never imagined possible during the difficult times she faced in the past. His days were filled with the continuous expansion of his business, supporting his son Pedro in his own business ventures and moments of serenity with Antoine. The romance between the two, which began cautiously, had transformed into a solid and respectful partnership. Antoine not only understood the importance of Isabella's work, but also encouraged her to explore new frontiers, both professionally and personally. Pedro, in turn, grew not only as a businessman, but also as a person. He took on an increasingly important role in the company, leading with the same integrity and vision he learned from his mother. Under his leadership, the new line of affordable clothing for young people became a resounding success, leading the brand to reach an even wider audience. Pedro proved to be an innovative and responsible leader, with a sense of justice and ethics that won over both customers and employees. He and Isabella worked in harmony, each respecting the other's space and ideas, and together, they shaped the company's future. On a personal level, Pedro also found his own happiness. During a charity event organized by Isabella, he met Sofia, a young architect who shared his passion for innovation and design. The two quickly became inseparable, and Pedro's relationship with Sofia brought even more joy to Isabella's life, as she saw her son finally find someone who completed him. Sofia became a constant presence in the family's life, bringing with her a lightness and energy that everyone appreciated. Meanwhile, Antoine and Isabella frequently discussed the future. Isabella, who had spent most of her life working tirelessly, began to consider the idea of gradually withdrawing from her daily business, letting Pedro take on even more responsibilities. She knew he was ready and that the company was in good hands. Furthermore, Isabella wanted to enjoy more of the simple and precious moments in life, something she had learned to value after so many years of struggle. During a romantic trip Antoine organized to celebrate Isabella's birthday, they visited a winery in Tuscany, where Isabella felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Sitting next to Antoine, admiring the sunset over the vineyards, she realized that she was ready for a new phase in her life. She had already proven to herself and the world what she was capable of. Now, it was time to reap the rewards of her hard work and enjoy the life she had worked so hard to build. Back in Brazil, Isabella announced to Pedro her decision to begin gradually moving away from the company's daily operations. She wasn't retiring, but she wanted to give him the space to grow further as a leader. Pedro accepted his mother's decision with maturity and enthusiasm, aware of the great responsibility that now fell on his shoulders, but also confident that he was ready for the challenge. The new generation. Isabella then dedicated herself to a series of new personal projects. She founded an NGO aimed at empowering women in vulnerable situations, offering training and opportunities so that they too could transform their lives through work, just as she had done. The NGO quickly gained notoriety and support, and Isabella felt deep satisfaction seeing the positive impact it was having on so many people's lives. Pedro and Sofia got married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded only by their closest friends and family. It was a day of pure happiness for everyone, especially for Isabella, who saw her son begin a new stage in his life with a partner who supported and inspired him. Antoine, always by Isabella's side, proved to be a true pillar of emotional support, and the two began to plan their future together, perhaps with a country house in Europe where they could spend part of the year in peace. In the following years, the empire that Isabella built continued to prosper. Under Pedro's leadership, the company adapted to new generations and trends, remaining a brand of prestige and innovation. The new line of affordable clothing, along with the sustainability initiatives Pedro introduced, ensured the company not only survived, but thrived in an ever-changing market. Isabella, now in her well-deserved semi-retirement, divided her time between NGO projects, trips with Antoine, and precious moments with Pedro and Sofia. She knew she had created something lasting, something that had not only changed her life, but the lives of many others. The empire she had built, with so much effort and dedication, was safe in her son's hands and would continue to grow and inspire future generations. Isabella's story teaches us about the incredible strength of human beings in the face of adversity. Abandoned in a moment of vulnerability, she turned pain and despair into fuel to build a life of success and fulfillment. Isabella shows us that, with determination, courage, and a clear vision, it is possible to overcome even the biggest challenges and create a legacy that not only changes our own lives, but also the lives of many around us. Her resilience is a powerful reminder that we are not defined by the blows life deals us, but by how we pick ourselves up and move forward. On the other hand, Tomas's trajectory warns us about the consequences of irresponsible choices and a lack of empathy. His fall serves as a warning that the decisions we make, especially those that hurt others, have repercussions that can follow us throughout our lives. In the end, life rewarded Isabella's strength and integrity, while Tomas's weakness and selfishness led him to a tragic fate. Now that you've followed Isabella's inspiring story, we want to know, what lesson from this story impacted you the most? Leave your answer in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and share this video with friends and family. Together, we can spread messages of strength and overcoming to inspire more people to transform their lives. Until next time.